Good evening, everyone. So, just we have Aaron here with us, but just before that, I would like to invite you all, uh, and it's a great pleasure to have you here on the 13th edition of the IGDC. And this year also we have lots of eminent speakers. In fact, we have about 120 plus eminent speakers speaking over the next 3 days. And they're going to share very invaluable experiences, insights, trends, and also their professional as well as personal journeys, right? So this is something you all will definitely enjoy. And in addition, I would like to take a second and thank all our sponsors as well for making this happen. And without their support, it would have been very difficult. So today in this session, Aaron is going to speak about how creative risks on Borderlands were enabled. And please note, we are very honored to have someone like Aaron coming here and sharing with us his experiences and talking about this particular topic. I don't know how many of you know about Aaron, but he's a veteran in this gaming industry. It's been more than 2 decades. He has been in the industry, creating and building massive games as well as building passionate teams. Okay. So Aaron has been with Gearbox Software for almost 15 years, always building and creating production departments and mentoring the leads ever since the first Borderlands was, started production. Okay. So he has played he has played multiple roles in the capacity of senior producer, executive producer, and head of production. So just to give you a little bit about Borderlands is a hugely popular and critically acclaimed game series. It has sold more than 60 plus million copies and generated a whopping 1 million plus revenue in its lifetime. Am I correct, Aaron, or I'm way off the mark?
Sounds right to me.
Okay, yeah, but please note it is no mean feat, and that's why Borderlands is considered as one of the most successful video game franchises, right? So this is on the business side or on a day-to-day basis what Aaron does. But please note that Aaron is very passionate about creating talent for our industry. So he has been part of many initiatives on education and creating educational programs, working with universities. And in fact, he was responsible for setting up the first graduate game school, the Guildhall at SMU, right? So please note that that is his passion for the industry and genuine interest for building this industry and not only making games, also creating talent and making sure that this industry continues to grow. Okay, so that is one very brief introduction about Aaron. And before I call upon to speak, I just wanted to quickly run you through the session format. So it's about 30 minutes of presentation from Aaron. He's going to talk about how the creative risks on Borderlands were enabled. Then post that, there will be about 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A. And, he's very happy to answer your questions. And please ask questions. There's a Q&A tab on the right. Please click there and put your questions. And during the Q&A sessions, he'll try and answer as much as your questions. Thank you so much. And I would welcome Aaron to start his presentation.
Okay, thank you, Raju. Wonderful to meet you all. I'm going to now do my best to share my screen. All right, I believe that you are seeing the conference slide. Raju, is that right? Oh, Raju, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Do you see my conference slide?
That's right. We can see.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. I'll be just behind the scene.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you for having me at the India Game Developer Conference. I've been looking forward to this since Neho Lawrence mentioned it to me a couple of months ago. And it's about a topic that I'm very passionate about. Um, but I have to kind of gearbox Borderlands eyes this presentation a bit. So, hello, travelers. I come from a studio, Gearbox, where we really favor creativity and stretching our imagination. And we are seekers. We're seekers of creating value, of being worth more than we cost. It's ingrained into our culture, and providing experiences that people haven't had before around the world. So here we go. This has a little bit more of a gearbox feel to it now, I think. So let's talk about enabling creative risks and a few things. It's really a talk on philosophy and our approach to what we did before Borderlands as a studio, and what we did during the making of Borderlands, and kind of how that's helped us leverage our creative and technical capabilities to be where we are today. I want to make sure that I leave some room at the end for Q&A, because I'm very interested to hear your questions and to engage with you all. This is a graffiti mural from Gamescom 2012, I think, when we were launching BL2. How did we get to this point? Well, the opportunity to make a game like a Borderlands, and I know that there are a lot of studios who have been in a work for hire loop for a very long time. So how do you find that opportunity? For us, a lot of it was about having the credibility to do it, to be listened to when this crazy pitch came up. And so speaking to owners and managers, leaders in game development, it is your responsibility to build the team's credibility, right? You're not just building your individual credibility in the industry. You are responsible for the credibility of your team. And that credibility is currency that you use when you are doing business deals, or your business team is doing business deals. And you have to know how to leverage that credibility as a currency when you're doing those deals. And usually that credibility is lent. It's not spent. You don't just cash it in, right? You're lending it for a time, and you may get it, you may get it back and you may not. But every time you kind of take a dice roll on doing a project, you are staking your credibility on that project. And we staked it in a big way on Borderlands. So Gearbox has been around since '99. The first game was a standalone expansion for Half-Life that the founders of Gearbox were able to convince Gabe and the team at Valve to kind of take a risk on this fledgling team. But they were able to, the original Gearbox founders and creative team were able to pitch their ideas in a way that wasn't very risky for Valve, that had a green light process and stage gates associated with it, and was a pretty tight turnaround. So from Valve's standpoint, there wasn't a lot of risk going into it, but it meant everything to Gearbox to have that shot to work on their IP, which they loved and which I loved. Was in fact one of the things that brought my attention to Gearbox when I moved to Dallas later. The first 5 years were all about working on other people's IP. All along the way, building credibility, delivering, taking on hairy problems to ship on different, to do ports to different platforms, and to bring in new modes and design ideas into these games, including, I think some people are aware, maybe not everybody, that Gearbox actually made the multiplayer for Halo Combat Evolved, which then, generated kind of an industry of competitive multiplayer for console games. After the PC game came the console version of multiplayer, and it went from there. And doing those things earned Gearbox the opportunity to use that credibility to do something new. The background of the business case of Brothers in Arms is really fascinating, and we don't have complete time to go into it now. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Borderlands, but As happens in the industry, you start out with a deal and a plan, and you've got to, as a team and as leaders of teams, adapt all the time. You've got to create the space for your creatives to be creative. That's an important theme. And you've got to handle the kind of hard knocks of business that come up and be fast and adaptive as possible. So your network of partnerships has to be broad. Your ability to pick up the ball if you lose a deal or you're in danger of cratering on a deal. Maybe you're in mid-flight, comes up, and you've got to build in things to your contracts that allow you to get your creativity to get your IP back so that you can go somewhere else if it doesn't work out. As I said, Brothers in Arms has a very interesting history that way, and a good partnership was found for Road to Hill 30 with Ubisoft. And on the heels of Road to Hill 30, it found success. The team had a history of quickly delivering products and decided to leverage that for themselves, for their own new IP. So they did a fast turnaround from Hill 30 to Earned in Blood. And with the success of Earned in Blood, decided to go even further with the storytelling and cinematic delivery and technology and platform features for the franchise. And so began working on Hell's Highway. And also on the heels of that success, worked with Ubisoft to port and license the IP for a variety of platforms, including mobile. And that's been really cool to see. Someday we'd like to get back to finishing the stories that we started with Brothers in Arms, but it really set a good stage for proving we could deliver under pressure and keep design and story quality high, even in those tight time frames. That also set us up to do things that we just wanted to do. So on the heels of Hell's Highway, we had a few people who were just interested in this old game, Samba de Amigo. There was this new platform out, the Wii, and this was not our bread and butter, but it's an example of the kind of creative risks that our team was interested in taking if they could. So we actually put the business together with Nintendo and Sega to release a Samba de Amigo game for the Wii. Well, it turns out there are really challenging technical problems using the nunchucks with the first-gen Wii. And we worked with Escalation Studios to solve those technical and design challenges. We decided that our internal R&D time was better spent elsewhere. Also, it gave an incubation opportunity to our friends locally who had been at Ritual and other companies in town to come in and do their own thing. We didn't feel we had to own everything. We thought partnerships were really valuable, and helping them build up their company it felt important to us as a good member of the community and as friends to other developers. And that worked out pretty well for them in that they became part of id Software and Bethesda later. And during Hell's Highway development, when we started landing, getting into full production, realizing that we had talent coming off of Halo who could do other things, a pitch was made for Borderlands. The high concept there was it was Diablo meets Halo in kind of a Mad Max universe. And the concept of the collection from Diablo and that style of role play mixed with the visceral first-person experience of Halo in a world themed around kind of Mad Max themes really tweaked the interest of 2K. And that created an awesome partnership for the future. They understood that there would be risks inherent in trying to create a new hybrid genre like that, and they were willing to take those risks with us based on the credibility that we'd earned in those prior games that we talked about. And ultimately, Borderlands ships in 2009 across platforms, which forced the studio to go into a multi-project, cross-platform approach in production, which is something that I tackled when I stepped into the company, especially to land the game. I moved from a senior producer role into an EP and head of production role in order to bring teams together to land this title, which would be the biggest effort that we'd had to land a game to date. And since then, we've been able to leverage that and our passion for the material and our passion for what the Borderlands framework represents to our developers to be creative, to enable us to do other things, and to try out new things. So obviously BL2, is a sequel, and pre-sequel as a sequel to Borderlands set us up to keep finding out what kind of the heart and soul of that game was and to keep refining it. It set us up to work with 3D Realms to take on the Duke Nukem IP and help them finally ship Duke Nukem Forever, which of course was taking forever. And to try out new things with the first hero shooter, Battleborn. And all of those things have set us up to take new creative risks. Now that we're part of Embracer and 2K loves the franchise and the characters and the stories that we've been telling with it, we're taking new creative risks with Wonderlands, which we're all very, very, very excited about. So in terms of enabling creative risks, there's a framework that you have to have in place, right? You've got to have a great QA team and a great QA process. You might think it's funny I'm starting with QA, but let me tell you, how do you know if you're making improvements if you don't have a way to measure it? And there are a lot of things about about being creative that require a good test case guide and test case framework. And so you've got to have a QA team who is on the same page as you creatively so they understand what you're trying to achieve. Which is why we have an in-house awesome QA team. And you've got to have the right producers with the right mindset and PMs in the right roles. What does that mean? For us, they've got to be there to enable the team. They've got to be contributing to good morale. They've got to love data and solving problems and being curious, right? Always be collecting data. And they've got to love aggregating data. You see, there's a theme here around data, but they've also, around that, have to love decomposing problems, which means they have to be cross-discipline thinkers and have a background in various things so that they have the context for the kinds of decisions that have to be solved so that they can decompose them and then surround themselves with people whose opinion they're going to value to help them decompose those problems and task them, reporting and then clearing those problems as a measuring stick for themselves, because they have to measure their own performance to do those things. So this is the original Borderlands style. A lot of people still love this style, but as we were in development, and we've given talks about this in the past, for example, SIGGRAPH 2010, where we talk about the Sobel filtering R&D that we did. This style stopped matching the feel of the game. Originally, there had been an intent among the different styles that we looked at to attempt to create a graphic illustration comic book style. But we knew it would be costly. It was very risky, and it wasn't called for at that time. It wasn't until the feel of the game called for it, because of the over-the-top style gameplay and bringing in that sort of role-playing dynamic from Diablo in a first-person context, that we realized that this photorealistic sci-fi style that we were going for wasn't really matching up this over-the-top feel that the game was asking of us as developers to give it. So we had to do something different. This is the schedule for BL1. This is just a high-level sketch of the schedule for BL1, and you can see when I joined the company, it was in 2007, and we were intended to be done with the game pretty much the following year. Once we decided to change the style, this came on very late in 2008. it was kind of too late. We didn't want to bust our P&L as responsible developers. So if we were going to do something different, it had to be something that was feasible and that we could organize the team around. And so it asked of incredible creativity from both artists and technologists to discover a style, basically to rediscover that old illustrative style that we'd wanted to shoot for, and bring that to the fore. So you can see this task that was created to do that investigation, created by an art director assigned to a tech director. And inside this very long thread, all of the Q&A and kind of camaraderie of conversation and, like, hey, look, we're doing stuff fast. You've got to give me what I need to do my job. But with, all in a very friendly way, right? Even though they're under a lot of pressure, and reporting of results and all those things happen as fast as possible because speed was what was called for. Also, and I'll get back to kind of the results of that in a minute. Also, in order to enable the kind of creativity that has to happen quickly, everybody's going to probably lose their mind if you make a decision like that to change the art style so late in development. And so you've got to have department leads who take ultimate responsibility for what's happening in their department and who can be trusted. And these are excerpts from an email that our manager of animation sent to all the parties in the company who were worried about the length of time it was taking for different assets that were being made to be developed and iterated, because we were having to solve unknown problems that were coming up in the design and functionality of different characters, NPCs and enemies in the game. And the takeaway I want you to have from this here is these 6 things. You've got to have time-boxed iteration to enable that creativity where the manager is taking on the responsibility. It's got to be based on quality so that the creatives understand that they're doing the right things for the right reasons. It's got to be respectful of deadlines, so the manager is taking responsibility for that, and internally within his department, in this case, obviously has that agreement with his devs. You see here the manager is open to feedback about his process and that time boxing. Also to give others who are up and downstream from this work a voice in the length of time and the quality of the work. And it establishes expectations, internal to the department and external to the department. I kind of see what we've done and generally enabling creativity as a leader in a company, kind of according to, following Maslow's hierarchy, where at the bottommost layer are the things that you just need to survive, right? And from there, you can build on these foundations to get to a point where you have self-actualization and the ability to be ultimately creative in a way where you have access to information coming from many disciplines and able to influence those different disciplines, which is game development, is a lot of disciplines working together on a vision. So you can see these here. For the sake of time, I'm not going to give a deep description on each thing here, but it's funny how often we don't have clear roles to provide the organization needed to then set up the safety that a team needs, along with the the individual decision on taking on work that may fail and having the freedom to do it, knowing that they're holding themselves accountable for that work. Otherwise, you can't have an environment that leads to something like a Borderlands. And as leaders, we need to provide that safety, which lends itself to cohesion, the kind of morale that can emerge from it with the team. And ultimately, towards the top here, by creating an environment in which truth matters. So you're going to collect data on features, on design, art, things like that. And so you are trying to drive towards an objective truth, not just something subjective from, say, a department lead. that influence of logic allows you to then experiment scientifically, leads to invention, and then there, on the proof of the quality of things that you can invent, you can gain creative control. And creative control leads to adoption of the ideas that you want to bring to, say, a new IP or to anything that you're working in. This is how I think about it. And on Borderlands, that environment of kind of that hierarchy of needs and us as leaders supporting the team to be creative, we moved from a kind of autocratic or authoritarian style of decision making to one that was distributed and democratic. So you have to have things, kind of guideposts that provide the alignment to the team. And so for us, we talked a lot about Paul Verhoeven, our design director on the title, was looking for ways to simply convey what the theme of the game was. And this was one of several. And if you know Verhoeven's movies and you understand the kind of mix of humor and action and some, and the way that violence is used as a kind of creative tool, then you'll kind of get where this part of Borderlands comes from. As I just said, we had to move in order to enable that kind of creativity for the team, to be fast in the face of big changes like the art style change, which was really also a design style change. We had to move to representative democracy, where the people who are doing the work have their voices heard and can have bottom-up influence, along with top-down structure. We had to stamp out, when you then give voices to a lot of people who haven't had that voice as much before, you've got to watch out for toxicity, and you don't know maybe what's going to emerge because you haven't built fully built the healthy culture yet. So having respect for downstream work had to increase. If you are, a designer and your design calls for animation and art and audio and, level design, whatever, to then follow on the heels of your thing, well, you as a designer have to appreciate that downstream work. So a lot of effort went into having that kind of work be recognized and be formalized into process. Kind of the respect of that work had to be formalized into process. And with that shift in mindset, we decided to see Borderlands as a team platform instead of a person or a few people's opus, creative opus of all things. Like this was, as a one shot to prove that they could do it. It had to move to something that the team adopted as their own. And that is definitely reflected in kind of all the aspects of Borderlands that you experience when you play it. No senior developer, no capable developer just wants to work on somebody else's thing and be told what to do. They need to have room to make decisions and be creative. And when you move that decision-making and responsibility to individual team members kind of at the edge of decision-making, you also still have to have a way to tell good from bad and consistency for the project. And so, those complex things like system changes require experience, context, and data to assist in measuring changes as they're made. And even trained people can have a hard time knowing why something isn't achieving what you want yet. And when you're working under pressure, it's very difficult to deal with something not being good enough yet that you're iterating. For us, what we did was we created a group called Truth Team, which is still to this day, our user research group, whose job was to frame team questions of what was happening in the game and what users were experiencing in the game to generate data and analyses for team members who were responsible for features and design and art and parts of the game. So the emergence of that user research group and the appreciation for the analyses and data that they collected was important. But with that said, it was also important to keep the analysis in the hands of the people executing on the work. I've told before, you may have heard stories before where when we were first iterating on the arts with the art style change, the behavior of the skags in the game, um, the data seemed to be telling us that there were too many skags in the areas where combat was being tested with them. And the designer looked at the data and the analysis and said, aha, I've got it. The problem is there aren't enough skags in the area. Well, that designer had the view of what was being sought to achieve with combat pacing, and pacing overall in the game, and where tuning and balance had to go, that the analysts didn't have, and so we trusted the designer to make the changes and proved correct. As well, to enable the level of creativity you need for a game like a Borderlands, you've got to recognize that happiness is more important than harmony. It takes a long time for some to get to this point because many are trying to create sort of team harmony. But for us, the friction of dealing with challenges and challenging each other on the answers that we're arriving at for features and designs, and learning from each other is important. But being creative is where happiness happens for us, right? And if there's harmony, then there's not a lot of room for creative friction, and not toxicity, but creative friction. And creative friction is very important to invent new things. And then ultimately, then that led to us really realizing what the style and design and theme of the game was. Here's the Borderlands 2 Game Informer cover, where we really brought color back into the palette. If you remember for BL1, it was more of the Gears of War kind of gray and brown Mad Max environment where we realized this over-the-top kind of game really calls for kind of a palette that matches the feel of the design. And then into Borderlands 3, I think we really realized it. When we talk about self-actualization, I think the team really realized what the palette and theme and style called for, to bring Borderlands 3 as far into the forefront as it needed to be, with its visual cues. So here's some high-level takeaways. We had to move to a customer service mindset, both internal and external, and have a great partnership with 2K. We had to have customer service with them, but maintain respect for a mutual respect. That has to happen internal and external to truly be creative and have freedom. You've got to identify and assign who needs to make which kinds of decisions and when, which can be a difficult and timely thing to do for producers to create and maintain that framework. And you've got to equip decision makers with info they need and let them give the requirements and criteria, since they understand the problem best. You've got to get those decision inputs as close to where the work is done, and have the decision makers be accountable for evaluating the information they're provided, all up and down the chain. You can't just be handed a report or given an analysis or be told something by somebody on the team and not pay that the respect that it deserves, that information. So don't remove the authority and voice from the people who execute on the decisions. Keep project decision-making visibility as high as possible with team communications and cabal and group decisions. Report those out to the team on a regular cadence. Understand that uncomfortable truths are good to discuss when there's a culture of objective truth and a safe work environment. And the converse of that is deadly dangerous. It will tank your project, your team, and lose you all the credibility in the world if you can't have conversations around uncomfortable truths. You've got to create those multiple lanes of specialized communication with partners, as we did with 2K, where we had a business lane, a production lane, a design lane. You've got to be able to create these multiple lanes if you want to move from kind of tightly controlled work for hire to something like a Borderlands project. And you've got to align yourselves. The alignment is so important. So align globally around team pillars and company pillars. Like for us, creativity, happiness, and success at the time. Now it's creativity, happiness, and profit. And then align locally around the project pillars. I gave one example with Verhoeven. Treat partners well. Insist on being treated well. Remember that you've earned it. Keep expectations clear. You've got to track everything. Thank you very much. And I look forward to your questions if you have some. All right, let's see. I see some questions in the chat here. So at the time we picked Unreal, right, we had a lot of experience working with Valve on with Source. It was at a time that Gears was in development. We had a lot of friends at Epic, and we loved what was happening visually, and then the kind of support of design and the tool set that was being built for Unreal. I wasn't at Gearbox at the time. The decision was made for the green light for Borderlands to go into Unreal, but as I recall, those were important factors. Being able to do both internal and external environments would be important for something that would be kind of an open world themed game. Why did we encounter any issues while implementing the shader? It's not. I wouldn't call it a cartoon shader, but but I understand the question. I would say to really answer that, go find our SIGGRAPH 2010 talk that I gave with Martel and the rendering engineers who worked on it. I think we had Zoner and Zyman there. Did we encounter issues? Yes. In fact, I showed that task where there was Q&A done when we were doing the investigation and setting up. So, like, for example, I even in that slide showed there was an issue with noticing where meshes were colliding and verts and being able to find normals off of a geometry that's very close to kind of with the frustum. My motivation to stay in the games industry, I love making games, and I'm doing a lot of really fun things around educating new people to make games and to learn about the specializations and pursue career paths. The technology and philosophy of educating people to do things that are as cross-disciplinary as making games isn't something that you find a lot typically in traditional education. That's really exciting to me. I also do work in concept. I'm part of our creative services team, or our creative decision-making team. So I can apply kind of these processes and frameworks to new things that we do. So I'm really excited about kind of the future of things that we're doing. How I advocate or ask for more autonomy to the leadership team. Great question. Be specific. When you're asking for more autonomy, often your managers may be hearing, oh, you don't want to report to me, or you want to take control away from me. So what you have to do is reinforce how you getting more autonomy actually supports them better, can make them look better and provide, kind of lead to better results. And feel free to use examples like I gave on Borderlands or anything else where by you being, autonomous to a point, it's still on you to report up, right, and to manage up. But advocating that is, it's kind of like, well, is the leadership very happy with where you are today, or do they want something different to happen? And if they want something different to happen, well, something different has to happen, organizationally as well, and in the philosophy of working with the team and how people either get assigned work or assign themselves work. It's a real important fundamental thing. How much iteration in processes and technical pipelines did we have to go through to bridge the gap of building original player experience in Game UX? In the first step, such a long focus on porting. A fair bit. So the question is, how much iteration and process and technical pipeline do we have to go through to bridge the gap of building original player experience in Game UX in your first result? It was a lot. It was not easy, especially because Borderlands itself is a hybrid of genres. And the answer you think might work for one of the genres it's a hybrid of doesn't necessarily work in the hybrid. So user experience is still something that we work really hard on. But even with the focus on porting, we were still doing a lot of creative design work. And I gave the multiplayer example with Halo. Balancing the need to build credibility with respect to outsourced work. Given outsourced crunch. Yeah. Well, we've over the years tried uh, consistently to move towards better and better work-life balance. Um, this is a really hard one. When we talk about crunch and outsourced crunch, going back to, it was one of my last points of demanding respect because you've earned it through your credibility. You may have to cash in chips that you've earned in order to gain better work-life balance. I think a lot of this is kind of specific to circumstances. Um, there are developers out there and publishers, publisher-owned studios who frankly don't care about a lot of the things that I said. I'm giving you an example from Gearbox's point of view, and in a team like a Borderland, of course, it's not a Borderlands team; it's a Gearbox team that works on whatever we happen to be creatively investing ourselves in at the time. There are publishers who don't give a crap. They just want to deliver the same, effectively the same sort of experience every year that's incrementally better. And they have a formula for how much work that's going to take. And you can either do it or you can't because you fit within their budget or you don't. That's on you to kind of make individual decisions about how to get yourself in the position to take on that kind of work and move away from one kind of work to another. That's really on you for your strategy. But I completely appreciate the challenges involved in the question that you're asking. And I myself worked on a team when I was at EA that always crunched. I worked on a team that crunched for 4 years. Think about that. And I completely appreciate the question. Um, how did the decision making work when it came to the switch in art style? Coming to us from the realization something like an outline effect can be achieved. Did the team pick which way to use? I understand the press would have been iterative, but how did the team? Yes, it's actually some of that is in the task that I posted. Around at first we were doing an edge detection line drawing, and then we moved to a more elegant solution of Sobel filtering, and then from there we moved to an even more elegant solution building on top of Sobel filtering that then also went really deep into the art creation process and where inks are used and where they're not, and like a very detailed process. We've also given other talks on that, but there was the decision making involved everybody and a lot of prototyping and proving those things out in game. We started with a few assets in Firestone, which is an area in the first game. And we used the kind of concept look from one of our concept artists and sought to achieve that. And based on the success of just applying kind of a kit bash style with a rendering applied to those assets, we decided to expand that to more assets and more environments and solving problems along the way. How do you find artists that are good at a particular art style for your game? It's hard. Not everybody can work in the Borderlands art style, but we've gotten better at creating kind of the art process and art Bible to go with that. But yeah, it's hard. When do you cut out content creatively? All the time. If you're doing your job, you'd never ship a game which has all the things in it that you thought you would have in it. When do you do it? We don't have time to, I don't know if we have time to go into that, but like, oh, thank you. High five back. I saw that last thing. Yeah, I mean, your producers you have to work within a framework, a decision-making framework of production that enables you to make those cuts when they need to be made. And those cuts can be aggressive, like we're going to cut this map in half. Oh, and you're going to be beta on this in 2 weeks. Like you have to know sometimes some decisions are allowed to go too long. Your producers have to be good at time boxing and providing the framework for those kinds of decisions. Have any of these structures been applied to other studios like Blackbird? Very interesting question. Blackbird are awesome. They are super pro, and many of them are more veteran than most of the people at Gearbox. I would think yes. When we were working with them on Shipbreakers, they really refined in on the vision themselves for the most part about how to get that game shipped at high quality, and the stuff that they're doing now just kicks ass. So I wouldn't say so much we applied it to them. I would say a lot of these things are sort of things that very senior kind of veteran teams and developers in the industry kind of already do. and they're sort of an example, I think, of that. How do you balance between delaying the game for maintaining quality and meeting the deadline? How do you know when to stop getting feedback and release the game? That goes, man, there's a lot to unpack there. You have to have a really great, respectful relationship with, if in this case, say on Borderlands 1 with our publisher 2K. It happened to be we were able to develop that relationship between Randy and Christoph at the CEO level, and myself and John Chowanek in production, and Brian Martell and Greg Goby in creative. And of course, like, people change over time, but you've got to have a sense of where you are within your P&L, where your product will be, how it will be positioned, and what it'll be positioned against at the time that you release, and making sure that your positioning and your P&L and the opportunity match up. And if they don't match up, hopefully you can be creative enough to figure out how to do it. Frankly, sometimes you got to cut bait and ship anyway. That's not a situation anybody wants to be in. If you've been around long enough, you've been in that situation. I have, but it happens. You just have to have the respect of each other to know that you're going to have the uncomfortable conversations as often as they need to happen. Raju, I see you popping in. Are we over time?
I'm so sorry to be a spoil sport, but especially such a great session happening. So many questions are being asked and being answered, and but yeah, we just have a constraint on time. But probably you could answer one more question and then we'll look at winding it down.
Okay. Well, let's see what the next one was. How about a small team of like 3 or 4 managing all these roles for a small game? How to handle these many responsibilities? I actually think if it's a small game and you can be ego-less, then it should be easy. It depends on how long the 3 or 4 of you have worked together, how much respect you have for each other, and how much, how well you work with, and how much communication you have that exists within the frameworks that I was talking about with other people who are working on the project with you. It has to start with respect and with reinforcing that you're going to work within a framework, and that kind of cold logic applied to what you're doing, not just emotion. With that said, some of the best results come from the passion of what's inside of you applied to the game you're making. But the closer you get to ship, it's a gradient, right? You can start with all the passion in the world. If you have set the constraint to ship by a certain time and you're coming in for that landing, you have to be able to turn all those passion statements, which are going to be your user stories, into little slivers, and allow for the iteration and throwing out of things that has to happen within those slices over time. So I don't know. That's a bigger, longer talk, I think, on production process, but that's sort of how I think about it. You want me to stop there, Raju?
Yeah, I'm again so sorry to.
Thank you for the questions. I love these questions are awesome. This is like a big reason why I wanted to do this talk, was to get these questions. I love these questions. I wish that we had another 30 minutes or something to do Q&A, but thank you. And thanks for the kudos.
We would definitely love to have you next year again, and more people, and much longer question and answer session. So, but very interesting. Like, we only see from the outside what comes out from Gearbox. You know what I mean? So, but now with your insight, what goes behind the scene, that's just amazing. So many things go there. It's just so good to know that what goes behind the scene, just not making the games. Also, how do you build a team and maintain creativity, as well as keep away from the toxicity and etc. Build a great culture. So it's fantastic, and so great to hear that. And thank you so much for taking us through your journey, what happens behind the scene. Fantastic. And just amazed by this whole talk.
Well, thank you very much. I love doing it. Love and appreciate the questions, and hope to engage more in the future. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. For the audience, thank you so much for your patience. And we know that we couldn't, Aaron couldn't answer many of your questions. We are constrained by time. But I have a request. There is a, feedback form. We would love you to fill it in. It'll really help us moving forward. It'll probably help us next year as well. So please share it. It takes less than a minute to fill it in. And thank you so much for your time. And I hope you enjoyed this. And we're really, really grateful and thankful to Aaron for coming over and sharing his experience with us. This is how it will help our gaming fraternity in India. And hopefully, it helps us make better games and get better at making games and, probably move into a global map very soon. Thank you
Perfect.
so much, Aaron, and great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you, Raju. Bye, guys.
Thank you.